The most dangerous thing about a vape may be how little it looks like a drug delivery device. It fits in a pocket. It can taste like fruit. It produces a cloud that disappears almost instantly. And because there's no ash, no burning tobacco, and often no obvious smell, the habit can feel almost invisible. But behind that simple design is a system capable of delivering repeated doses of nicotine directly into the body, sometimes so frequently that the user stops noticing how often it is happening. A person can pick up a vape while sitting in the car, take a few puffs, put it down, and forget about it. Then the hand reaches for it again 10 minutes later, maybe while watching television, maybe during a work break, maybe while scrolling through a phone. None of those moments feels dramatic. That is precisely why the pattern can become so difficult to recognize. The question is not whether vaping is exactly the same as smoking. It is not. The question is much more uncomfortable. What exactly is happening inside the body every time that device is used? To answer that, you first have to stop thinking of vaping as just flavor. The liquid inside a vape is turned into an aerosol and inhaled. That is a completely different process from simply breathing in humid air. Water vapor is a gas. The aerosol produced by a vaping device contains tiny droplets or particles suspended in the air. Those particles are created when a liquid is heated and then inhaled. The difference may sound technical, but it changes the entire conversation. You are not simply breathing in humid air. You are inhaling an aerosol created from the contents of a liquid cartridge or tank. So the real question is not, does the cloud look harmless? The real question is, what is inside the material entering the respiratory system? The answer can include nicotine, solvents, and flavoring chemicals, depending on the product. The exact formula can vary from one device to another, and not every vape produces the same exposure. But the idea that the user is inhaling nothing more than water is simply not accurate. And the flavor makes this misunderstanding even easier to believe. A vape that tastes like mango or mint does not feel like a drug. It feels like a flavored product. That is one of the reasons people can become comfortable with it so quickly. But there is an important difference between something being safe to eat and something being safe to inhale repeatedly. Your digestive system and your lungs are not interchangeable. They have different structures, different protective mechanisms, and different ways of handling substances. A flavoring ingredient may be used in food without that automatically proving it is harmless when heated and inhaled over and over again. Your lungs were not designed to process food flavoring. They were designed to exchange oxygen and carbon dioxide. And the problem becomes even more complicated because vaping is usually not a one-time exposure. A person may take one puff, then another 10 minutes later. They may use the device during a break, then again while driving, then again when they feel bored. The individual puff seems too small to matter, but the body is exposed to the pattern, not just one isolated moment. That repeated pattern is what makes the discussion about vaping so important. Then there is nicotine. This is where the subject becomes much more serious. Nicotine is a powerful stimulant drug that interacts directly with the nervous system. The brain contains receptors involved in chemical communication, including nicotinic acetylcholine receptors. Nicotine can interact with these receptors because its structure allows it to mimic some of the signals normally associated with acetylcholine. When that happens, the brain and nervous system receive a chemical signal that can influence multiple biological processes. In simple terms, nicotine is not just sitting in the lungs. The brain responds to it. The cardiovascular system responds to it. The nervous system responds to it. The body is constantly communicating through chemical and electrical signals, and nicotine enters that communication network. That is why the effects of nicotine are not limited to the place where the vapor was inhaled. Modern vaping products have also changed the way nicotine can be delivered. Many devices use nicotine salt formulations, which were developed to make higher nicotine concentrations easier to inhale with less of the harsh throat sensation associated with some traditional nicotine formulations. The result is a smoother experience for the user, and that smoothness matters because the throat is no longer providing the same level of resistance. Think about the body's natural warning systems. Pain makes you pull away. A harsh sensation can make you stop. But when the nicotine experience is smoother, a person may continue inhaling without feeling an immediate reason to slow down. The product can deliver nicotine while feeling surprisingly easy to use. That is one reason the habit can grow quietly. The user may not feel as if they are consuming a powerful drug. They may simply feel as if they are taking another puff. But the brain notices every one of those exposures. The nervous system is constantly trying to maintain balance. When it is repeatedly exposed to a chemical that stimulates certain receptors, it can begin to adapt. The brain is not passive. It changes according to what it experiences. If nicotine repeatedly activates certain pathways, the system can gradually become less sensitive to the same level of stimulation. This is one of the basic mechanisms behind tolerance. At first, a few puffs may create a noticeable effect. Later, the person may find themselves using the vape more frequently just to achieve a similar feeling. They may not sit down and consciously decide, I am going to increase my nicotine intake. The change can happen through small adjustments. One extra puff here, another break there. The device becomes part of more and more situations. And this is where one of the biggest myths about vaping appears. People say, it relaxes me. Nicotine is a stimulant. It can activate the nervous system and influence the cardiovascular system, including effects on heart rate and blood vessels. So if nicotine is stimulating the body, why does the user often feel better after taking a puff? Why do they say they feel calmer? The answer may be completely different from what they think. Imagine waking up every morning and putting a sharp pebble inside your shoe. You walk around with it for hours. It hurts, but eventually you become used to the pain. Then, once every hour, you take your shoe off for a minute. The pain suddenly disappears. You feel relief. You might honestly say, taking off my shoe makes me feel so much better. But the real problem is the pebble. Without the pebble, there would be no pain to relieve. Nicotine dependence can create a similar cycle. As the brain adapts to regular nicotine exposure, the absence of nicotine can become uncomfortable. The person may feel restless, irritable, distracted, or simply different from their normal state. Then they take a puff. The discomfort eases. That relief can feel like relaxation. But it may not be true relaxation. The nicotine may be temporarily reducing the discomfort created by the developing dependence. This is one of the reasons addiction can be so confusing. The person believes the substance is helping them feel normal, while the substance may be part of the reason they feel abnormal when they do not have it. Once the brain makes that connection, stress becomes a powerful trigger. A bad day at work can lead to vaping. An argument can lead to vaping. A long drive can lead to vaping. Boredom can lead to vaping. The brain begins searching for nicotine whenever the person experiences an uncomfortable emotion or situation. And the brain learns through repetition. It does not need a long explanation. It simply notices a pattern. Discomfort appears, nicotine follows, relief comes, the brain remembers. Then the same situation happens again. This time the craving may appear faster. That is how a habit can slowly become a chemical routine. There is another reason vaping can be particularly difficult to recognize as an addiction. Traditional smoking usually has a clear structure. You light the cigarette, you smoke it, eventually it is finished. The cigarette disappears. With a vape, the device can remain in your hand or on the table for an entire day. There is no obvious endpoint. A person can take one puff and go back to watching a movie. 10 minutes later, they take another, then another. The behavior is spread across the day. Because each individual action seems insignificant, the total amount of use becomes difficult to track. Many people honestly do not know how often they vape. They are not counting every puff. They are responding to cues. The device is nearby. The hand reaches for it. The brain already knows what happens next. And the more often this pattern is repeated, the stronger the connection can become. Now let's talk about dopamine, because this is another area where the public explanation is often too simple. People call dopamine the pleasure chemical. That description is incomplete. Dopamine is heavily involved in motivation, learning, and the process by which the brain decides that something deserves attention. Nicotine can influence dopamine-related reward pathways. When the brain repeatedly receives a strong chemical signal after a particular behavior, it starts learning that behavior. It begins to mark the action as important. That is why a person may suddenly crave vaping after seeing someone else use a device. The craving may appear when they sit in their car. It may happen after a meal. It may happen during a work break. The situation itself becomes connected to nicotine. The brain recognizes the cue before the conscious mind has fully processed what is happening. This is not necessarily a conscious decision, it is learned behavior. And the longer the pattern continues, the more deeply it can become connected to daily life. Eventually, some people do not vape because they are trying to feel especially good. They vape because not vaping feels uncomfortable. That is a major shift. The habit has moved from simple enjoyment toward dependence. The brain has adapted to the chemical, and when nicotine is suddenly removed, the person can feel the difference. This is why someone who says, "I can stop whenever I want," may be surprised by what happens when they actually try. They may become unusually irritated. They may struggle to concentrate. They may feel restless. They may constantly think about the device. Some people experience intense cravings. The brain has learned that nicotine is coming. Now the chemical is gone, and the brain begins searching for the old pattern. The easiest solution seems obvious. Just take one puff. The moment nicotine returns, the discomfort may temporarily decrease. And that teaches the brain something very powerful. It says, when you feel this way, use nicotine. The cycle becomes stronger. Now let's go back to the aerosol itself. Calling it smoke would be inaccurate because vaping does not involve the same process as burning tobacco. But calling it water vapor is also inaccurate. The aerosol is created by heating a liquid, and the chemicals produced can be influenced by the device, the temperature, the liquid, and how the product is used. Research has raised concerns about potentially harmful compounds in certain vaping emissions. Formaldehyde is one chemical that has received attention because of its known health concerns at sufficient exposure levels. Acrolein is another irritating compound that can be produced under certain conditions. Metals have also been detected in some vaping aerosols and may come from the device's heating components. Now, this does not mean every vape produces exactly the same amount of every chemical. That would be an inaccurate statement. Different products can behave differently, but the uncertainty is exactly why the phrase, "it's just water vapor," is so misleading. The cloud may disappear. The chemicals do not necessarily disappear from the conversation. And then there are flavoring compounds. Some chemicals used in flavor systems have raised concerns when inhaled, particularly because the lungs are exposed to them in a completely different way than the digestive system would be exposed to a food ingredient. This is a basic point that is often ignored. A chemical's safety cannot be judged simply by asking whether people can eat it. The route of exposure matters. The amount matters. The frequency matters. The way the chemical is heated matters. The lungs are not a second stomach. Yet the pleasant taste of a vape creates a powerful psychological illusion. If it tastes like fruit, the brain naturally wants to classify it as something familiar and harmless. That is one reason the flavor can make the product feel less serious than it really is. There is also a dangerous assumption that if vaping were harmful, the user would immediately feel something. But the body does not always work that way. Some effects are obvious, others are gradual. The lungs can compensate. The cardiovascular system can adjust. The brain can adapt. A person may feel completely normal while their body is responding to repeated exposure. That is one of the most frustrating things about addiction. There is no flashing warning light inside the device. The brain does not send a message saying, "You are becoming dependent." Instead, the warning signs may appear as small changes in behavior. The person begins carrying the vape everywhere. They become uncomfortable when it is missing. They start planning their day around access to nicotine. They say they will cut back. Then they use the same amount the next day and the day after that. These are the moments when the habit deserves attention. The body is not just dealing with the lungs. Nicotine can influence the nervous system, and the nervous system is connected to the cardiovascular system and the rest of the body. The heart, blood vessels, brain, and hormone systems do not operate as separate islands. The body is one interconnected system. When a stimulant repeatedly enters that system, the effects do not simply vanish because the visible cloud is gone. This is also why the comparison between vaping and cigarettes needs to be handled carefully. Cigarette smoke contains a huge number of chemicals produced by burning tobacco, and smoking is associated with severe health consequences. For an adult who already smokes cigarettes, completely moving away from combustible tobacco is a different situation from someone who has never used nicotine and starts vaping. Those two people are not making the same decision. A smoker trying to move away from cigarettes is asking whether one form of nicotine delivery is less harmful than another. A teenager who has never smoked and starts using a flavored vape is introducing nicotine into their life. The context matters. The problem occurs when people hear vaping may expose you to fewer harmful chemicals than cigarette smoke and translate that into vaping is harmless. Those statements are not the same. Less harmful than something else does not mean safe. And a person who never smoked does not reduce their risk by starting a nicotine habit. They add a new exposure. This becomes even more important when we talk about teenagers. The adolescent brain is still developing. The systems involved in attention, learning, impulse control, and decision-making continue to mature during those years. Every teenager is different, and not every person who vapes will experience the exact same outcome. But nicotine exposure during a period of brain development is not something that should be treated as meaningless. The brain is learning how to respond to rewards. It is building habits. It is developing patterns of behavior. Now introduce a highly addictive substance into that process. A teenager may not think, I am beginning an addiction. They may think, everyone else is doing it. They may think, it is just flavor. They may think, I can stop whenever I want. But the brain does not care what the product is called. It responds to nicotine. And if nicotine becomes associated with stress, boredom, social situations, or emotional relief, the brain can begin building those connections early. That is why I only vape when I'm bored is not necessarily an innocent statement. Boredom can become a trigger. The brain learns that nicotine changes the feeling. The same thing can happen with stress, or driving, or finishing a meal, or taking a break. The habit starts attaching itself to normal parts of life. Eventually, the person may not even know what they are actually craving. Are they craving nicotine? Are they craving the routine? Are they trying to escape stress? Or has the brain simply learned that this is what happens next? These questions are difficult because addiction is not always dramatic. Sometimes it is incredibly quiet. The person does not wake up one morning and suddenly become addicted. Instead, the behavior changes little by little. At the beginning, you decide to vape. Later, the situation decides for you. You sit in the car and reach for the device. You feel stressed and immediately think about nicotine. You take a break and feel that something is missing. The decision has slowly become automatic. And automatic behavior is powerful because the brain is designed to make repeated actions easier. Think about how many things you do every day without consciously planning every movement. You walk through familiar rooms without thinking about each step. You unlock your phone almost automatically. You follow routines because the brain has already learned them. Nicotine addiction can use that same system. A cue appears. The behavior happens. Nicotine arrives. The brain receives a signal. The pattern is reinforced. This is why telling someone to simply use more willpower does not fully explain the problem. They are not fighting one isolated decision. They are fighting a biological and behavioral pattern that has been repeated many times. Understanding that pattern is important. If you believe the vape is just flavored water, you will never understand why the cravings can become so strong. If you believe nicotine genuinely relaxes you, you may use it every time life becomes stressful. If you think the device is too small to matter, you may ignore how often you are using it. And if you assume addiction only happens to cigarette smokers, you may miss the warning signs happening in your own routine. The body does not care about the packaging. It does not care whether the device is brightly colored. It does not care whether the liquid tastes like mango. The brain recognizes nicotine. The lungs receive an aerosol. The cardiovascular system responds to a stimulant. And with repeated exposure, the body adapts. That is the part people often fail to see. Vaping can look clean, while the biology behind it is extremely complicated. The cloud disappears almost instantly. The habit can follow you from morning until night. And sometimes the moment that tells you the most about your relationship with nicotine is not the moment you take a puff. It is the moment you try not to. Because the real warning sign may be the feeling that appears when the device is suddenly gone. That restless feeling, that irritation, that thought you cannot stop repeating, just one more. And if the brain has learned to expect nicotine, that one more puff may not be the end of the cycle. It may be the reason the cycle continues.